Okay, so Jay Smith. So I saw the whole what do you call it? I saw the whole Speakers Corners video that David Wood put on his channel, and it's just him, Vocab Malone, and other annoying Christian apologists like Hatun Trash and this fat slob Jay Smith, annoying Muslims in Speaker's Corner. So David Wood, as usual, insults the Prophet Muhammad over and over again in order to get attention for himself. But I want to. So David Wood just insults the Prophet Muhammad, saying the Prophet Muhammad's a pedophile or a child molester. The same stupid arguments he keeps bringing up to get attention for himself. But anyways, I want to pay. I already refuted those arguments about Prophet Muhammad's marriage with Aisha, so I don't need to keep repeating it over and over again. But I just want to focus on what Jay Smith says here, because he says something that horribly backfires against his New Testament. So let's hear it from Jay Smith first.
Kids, so read what happens to that prophet.
Which I have not commanded him to speak, or which he speaks in the name of other gods, the prophet shall die.
He must be put to death. So you're saying that Muhammad has to be put to death because he comes in the name of another god. And we know that Allah is not that God. No! We know Yahweh has to be that God.
Okay, did everybody catch that? He's talking about Yahweh, and Deuteronomy 18 condemns Muhammad because the Prophet Muhammad never said Yahweh, in the Quran and the Hadith. And so Jay Smith is basically saying that since Muhammad spoke of another God, which is, opposite or contrary to Deuteronomy 18, that means the Prophet Muhammad is to be stoned or to be put to death because he spoke in another God's name. Now, this argument horribly backfires against Jay Smith because Jay Smith is a Christian, right? So he he gets his theology from the New Testament, the Greek New Testament, which is translated into English. So, I believe Jay Smith knows Greek. I'm not 100% sure, because I don't really pay attention to these clowns, these Christian clowns, like Jay Smith and James White. I think they're clowns, and I don't pay attention to them. But I think Jay Smith knows Greek. I believe so, even though I never heard him talking in Greek. I think he understands biblical Greek or New Testament Greek. So the question I want to ask Jay Smith is, where does Jesus say Yahweh in the New Testament? Where is Yahweh mentioned in the New Testament? Where does Jesus say Yahweh? Where do the disciples of Jesus say Yahweh in the Greek New Testament, or even the English, honest English translations of the New Testament? Nowhere in the Greek New Testament does Jesus say Yahweh. Nowhere in honest English translations of the New Testament, the NIV, the NASB, etc., nowhere does Jesus call his God or his Father Yahweh. Nowhere does Jesus say that. The Greek word used for God is theos and kurios in the Greek New Testament. So Jesus never said Yahweh. Nowhere in the New Testament manuscripts, the earliest New Testament manuscripts, is the name Yahweh ever mentioned. And this is important because other Hebrew names are translated from Hebrew to Greek, like Abraham, David, Solomon. These are all Hebrew names that ended up transliterated into the Greek New Testament. But nowhere is Yahweh mentioned in the New Testament. Nowhere does Jesus say Yahweh in the entire New Testament, even though it would have been very easy for the authors of the New Testament to transliterate that word from Hebrew to Greek into the Greek New Testament. The reason why is because Jesus himself spoke Aramaic, and in Aramaic they called God Allah or Elah or something of that nature. Because if you read the book of Daniel chapter 2, I believe, parts of the Old Testament book of Daniel is written in Aramaic, and you can see Elah all over the Aramaic the Aramaic portions of the book of Daniel. So Jesus probably called his God Allah or Ilah or something like that. Now, what does that sound like? It sounds like Allah more than it sounds like Yahweh, right? Yahweh and Ilah sound very different from one another, but Ilah or Allah and Allah sound very similar to each other from Aramaic to Arabic. So J. Smith horribly, like his argument horribly backfires against him because Yahweh is never mentioned in the Greek New Testament. Jesus never says Yahweh. Even if you read the English New Testament, nowhere do honest Christian translator, or nowhere do honest English translations of the New Testament use that word Yahweh. Nowhere is Yahweh mentioned in the Greek New Testament or the New Testament in good English translations of the New Testament. So nowhere does Jesus say Yahweh. So this argument backfires against J. Smith because J. Smith is a hardcore Jesus fanatic. And it's hilarious that he's talking about Yahweh because this argument horribly backfires against his New Testament or against the New Testament. And he doesn't understand the history of the name Yahweh. Yahweh probably comes from Median paganism, that the Israelites plagiarized that name Yahweh from paganism. And Yahweh, of course, had a wife named Ashura, and Yahweh comes from a pantheon of Canaanite and Median gods. And the Israelites just took Yahweh and the pagan god Yahweh and plagiarized that name and made it into their nationalistic god, or made him into their version of a nationalistic god for them. So Yahweh is definitely a pagan god's name, and nowhere does Jesus say Yahweh. So this argument against Islam horribly backfires against the New Testament and the New Testament and Jesus. So Christians should stop using the Yahweh argument if they want to be consistent and if they don't want to use double standards and hypocrisy. So they want to be hypocrites. So stay tuned. More videos coming up ahead. I don't think there's nothing in Speaker's Corner that was said that's been debunked already. He talks about the Prophet Muhammad marrying Aisha when she was 6 years old or 9 years old. That's already been refuted. So, that's it's like arguments like that were talked about in Speaker's Corner, but these arguments have already been refuted, so there's no reason to reinvent the wheel here. But I just wanted to show the hypocrisy or the double standard of J. Smith, because he needs to read his New Testament, because, this argument backfires against the New Testament. Okay, so that's my 2 cents on here. Stay tuned, more videos coming up ahead.